Zikar was leading me towards the stack of farmland reaching into the sky, roots and worms poking out of the bottom. Pangeans floated upwards to tend to their crops, before a sudden roar shook me. Similar to the Pangeans in biology, the creature was far more primordial. It stood about 6 feet tall, had sharp claws and teeth, and a tail that trailed behind it. It roared again as 4 Pangeans surrounded it and forced a bridle in its mouth, attached to thick, fibrous reins. To my astonishment, one of the 4 floated upwards and settled themselves on the back of the creature, before snapping the reins and riding through the field, throwing seeds as they went. The 3 remaining Pangeans walked away, their tranquility in complete opposition to the cryptid they had just domesticated. With no opportunity to come to terms with what I'd just seen, Zikar grabbed my arm and directed me into a small shack underneath one of the floating mounds, its roof scraping against the rock and dirt. Inside, an assault on my ears and eyes took the form of a restaurant. Culture shock hit me with a massive weight, as if the Pangean culture itself had used the same gravity magic of its people. In the kitchen, a tall pillar of flame billowed, central to everything else. Pangeans in tall hats levitated large vegetables and crops nearer and nearer the flame, cooking them using magic. There were no servers. A shrill rink echoed throughout the claustrophobic shack, and a grunt from a stout Pangean with a thick, domed skull and arms that touched the floor for a lack of length of her legs alerted the punters whose meal was ready to be floated over to their table. I had my work cut out for me, trying not to get covered in soup, spilling from flying bowls. Zikar swaggered towards a kitchen-side table, and I noticed he seemed to have lost a fair amount of his girth. His bones fought against layers of fat, muscle, and scale to see the world outside of his body, their victory imminent. At the table, 2 Pangeans stood, bowed, and made themselves scarce, allowing us to sit in privacy. I sat in awe as culinary techniques alien to me took place before my eyes. A large bowl of soup, fried vegetables, and a pie stuffed with grass later. Zikar spoke. Use magic, cost mass. Need much food? No mass? He paused again, searching his mind for the words to convey to me the restrictions of his people's magic. Death. At his words, I almost choked on a thick, root-flavoured drink whose name I could not recount to you if I tried. It was in that provincial restaurant of all places that my worldview was altered. Electromagnetism was not the only school of magic that was dangerous to its users. In a sudden rush of sepia-coloured nostalgia, I returned to my time in the academy. The computerized teaching aids, all of which linked with their majestic influence in education, Watley's networked mind, been given a lecture on the 4 schools of magic that ruled this world. Newtonmancy, decay, fusion, and, of course, electromagnetism. The crux of the lecture was this: our magic, electromagnetism, puts its users at significant risk and demands caution. The other schools pose no risk to their users. This fundamental difference, this need for caution, is what allowed us to advance beyond them. But now, on the Isle, here with Zikar's people, finished eating. Zikar's people must have had a fantastic metabolism, for his roundness swallowed his bones once again. He stood and escorted me out of the restaurant into the comparative silence outside. Time had absconded from me in there, for dusk was already sprinting towards us. Once again, I followed Zikar, eager to find my lodgings for the remainder of my extended stay. The following day, I woke in bemusement. My unconscious had formed images of 4 glowing orbs hitting a petri dish and forming land masses in the solution. When I entered the wakened world with full consciousness, I took note to return to the Orimancer's office upon my return to the homeland. For now, though, I took in my lodgings with fresh eyes. I was on the 2nd floor, and a hole in the floor sat by my feet. The lack of stairs did worry me, though a long rope dangled through it. Zikar's best attempt, I supposed. The rest of the room was quaint, if not simple. Grass and leaves hanging in a net made up my bed, and a large hole gaped in the wall on the other side by the door. I walked over and looked through, taking in the surrounding scenery. I thanked the influences that I had kept my eyes closed in the flight in. The thought of Zikar's thinning body and dizzying vertigo had made me quiver. I grabbed hold of the fabric to steady myself and lowered myself to the floor below. Zikar stood there, towering in the small room we found ourselves in. Entranced, he stared at a map attached to the wall, and it took me some time to extract him from his inner thinkings. I led him to sit on a chair in the corner and sat opposite him, looking at the map before I broke the ice. "I don't recognize any of these islands," I said, confused at the alien coasts and borders the map bore. "Pangean settlements," Zikar told me. "In past, 1, now many." I communicated understanding, and felt anything but. I made the 2nd note to myself of the day: reread the history books. Zikar and I sat together for an age while I explained to him the specifics of the project I was here for. It took a while for him to grasp how this machine would work, but once he did, we began building. On the 3rd day, Zikar's homestead now looked like a scrapyard. On the 5th, my crew finally left the Oestead and joined us on top of the isle, working on the machine with us. On the 7th day, disaster struck.